There is much to discuss, so let's get to our panel. Joining us via Skype from China is Aisan Oh. He is a senior fellow at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. From Chicago, we're joined by Kate O'Neill. She is associate professor in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management at UC Berkeley, and she has a new book coming out soon called Waste. With me here in the studio is Bridget Welsh. She is Associate Professor of Political Science at John Cabot University. She studies Asian politics, including Malaysia. And joining us too from The Hague is Dinyar Godrej. He is an editor with the New Internationalist. Welcome to all of you to the show. Aisan Oh, let me start with you in China. We just heard there from the Malaysian Environment Minister in that report, essentially saying that Malaysia has had enough of being the dumping ground for developed nations' waste. How big an issue is this in Malaysia?
Well, I think it is an issue which has not been properly recognized before, and that's mainly because for example, during the previous regime in Malaysia, corruption was very rife. There were, as you reported just now, a number of illegal waste processing sites being set up throughout the countries. Environmental enforcement was not properly carried out, for example, because of the rife corruption. Thereby, I think with, for example, China's ban of plastic waste import into China, for example, a lot of this waste from plastic waste primarily from developed countries such as Canada in this case, they were being shipped to Malaysia instead. And the new administration, especially the Ministry of Energy, it's quite serious about addressing this issue. You see the minister, for example, going on inspection trips around the country to try to sort of eradicate this sort of plastic waste away from Malaysia.
Kate O'Neill, the Environment Minister in Malaysia, she's been very critical of developed countries. She wants them to address this issue. This is part of what she had to say. Let's watch this.
We are here to urge the developed countries to also review their management of plastic waste and stop shipping garbage out to the developing countries. If they ship to Malaysia, we will return it back without mercy.
So, Kate, what is your view of what is happening in Malaysia right now and its fight to stop taking in this dump?
Yeah, I think that the events of the last year, ever since China implemented its Operation National Sword, I think we've really started to realize the global reach of wastes. That for us here in the United States, for example, knowing that what we throw in the blue bin now might well go to China, Malaysia, or Thailand, Vietnam, or other countries, I think has been a real shock and a real wake-up call. I think that for us, having the option of exporting these plastic wastes and other kinds of scrap has really been a safety valve in terms of not necessarily building our own waste disposal facilities, our own recycling facilities here when it's easier to ship to China and other parts of the world. I mean, having said that, I think it's also important to look at the demand for plastic scrap in these countries too, and to say, well, you know, how do we balance both the need for recycling and the need to balance our use of fossil fuel resources with the environmental and social problems that come along with waste in all shapes and forms.
Right. Kate, one of the points that was made by the Malaysian minister was that in many instances, waste that is labeled waste for recycling is in fact not waste that you can recycle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a huge problem. I think that is something that the international community has struggled to address since the 1980s. And we still haven't really figured out how to do that correctly. I think the general feeling is that, well, if it's clean scrap, like aluminum or steel that's been sent to China, then go for it. There's not so much of a problem. But the fact that what is being shipped in plastic bales and other kinds of waste bales for recycling is not recyclable at all due to the quality, due to contamination, what have you, is something that we really need to sit back and think about.
Bridget, what is your view on this? I mean, this problem is not just confined to Malaysia, it's happening in other Asian countries as well.
Well, it's a systemic problem. I think there's the North-South divide, which is actually really being exacerbated. And the fact is that many of these wastes are sent into vulnerable areas where communities really don't have the ability to fight back. And I think Malaysia is an exception in the sense that you've had a change in government, and so there's more responsiveness on the part of the government to dealing with these environmental concerns. But a lot of the people that are being affected are often poorer populations in rural areas that have less voices in these developing countries as well.
And to some extent, they are earning money from this, aren't they?
Well, the people who make the deals earn the money, but the people who have to leave with the circumstances are the ones who actually suffer.
Certainly not the people being affected by it.
Absolutely.
All right, let's bring in Dinyar Godrej. He's in The Hague. And Dinyar, I want to ask you the question that we posed at the beginning of the program, and that is, are developed nations taking advantage of developing nations here?
Certainly, in a globalized economy where the waste market is looking for people who are, labor that is exploitable and cheap and poor environmental standards, you can see why waste will immediately get attracted to the global south, where those conditions are often lacking and where labor is eminently exploitable. So it's a perfect storm, and it's really great that countries are saying no, because the problem is, as a good friend of mine used to say, do you tackle the problem by seeing the people who are throwing stuff off the cliff, or do you attempt to pick up the pieces on the ground? So far, we've been doing it the wrong way around, and we need a strong policy response.
I know the Malaysian Environment Minister, she was also critical of the fact that there are people in her country, Malaysia, who are illegally importing this waste into the country.
Well, indeed, as I mentioned before, this is not an isolated incident. It was a very widespread, especially during the previous regime when the environmental enforcement was rather relaxed. It was relaxed because it was simply a way to, in a sense, enable a certain segment of populations in order to hold on to government jobs, and then they could make their side incomes, and thereby they would still sort of lend their support to the government of the day. You will see government officials who are in collusion with some of these illegal waste importer and processors. And investigations, for example, have been going on. They have, in a sense, protection rackets around the country, sometimes around port areas and in rural areas and so on.
Yeah, we have a statement from the Environment Minister, or part of a statement that she made, in which she talked about this particular practice of people illegally importing waste. Let's watch this.
We also view the Malaysians who actually import the garbage to Malaysia they are traitors to the country's sustainability, and therefore they should be stopped and brought to justice.
So, Aisano, those are very tough words from the minister there, calling people traitors. What do you think will happen in Malaysia? Will Malaysia stop the import of waste completely?
Well, I think that's certainly the will of the new government, but to actually carry out such embargo or ban, I think is still rather difficult. You will still see people importing this waste by various means through various points of entries, ports, and so on. So unless for me at least, the underlying problem of this collusion between the importers and the government officials is properly addressed, I don't think you can completely sort of eradicate this problem.
All right, we need to take a quick break right now. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.